Our next guest at the India Today Conclave has one of the biggest shoes to fill in Indian business. As the son of Azim Premji, he is the inheritor of one of the proudest legacies in corporate India. He's taken over very recently as the chairman of the highly respected information technology behemoth Wipro. He's usually hugely reclusive and rarely speaks in public. But make no mistake, he is one of the most important Indian corporate leaders and shall remain so for several decades to come. So it's very important to know what he thinks and the direction in which he is taking Wipro and Indian information technology. The India Today Conclave is being organized at a time when automation and artificial intelligence are changing what companies do and what employees working in these companies are expected to do. The nature of the workforce is being transformed at a speed greater than ever before in history. And the future of the workforce has never been more uncertain. To talk about creating a culture of enlightened capitalism and the future of the Indian workforce, I want you to join me in welcoming to the India Today Conclave the new chairman of Wipro, Rishad Premji. He's also making his debut at the India Today Conclave, so can we have a very warm round of applause for the young man, please? Rishad, welcome. We're delighted to have you with us, so thank you so much for accepting our invitation. You have one of the biggest shoes to fill in Indian business. You've recently taken over one of the most coveted positions in corporate India. How's it going?
You know, it's interesting because I feel very blessed, to be honest, and the overwhelming emotion is energy and excitement. But I've got a great platform to build off, great opportunities built with great credibility over the last 50 years of the company. We were founded before the independence of India, as I was telling you in the green room. And so I'm very, very blessed. One of our board members said this to me when I was taking over, and everybody uses this line which says, you've got big shoes to fill. And he said, tell people that you're not going to be able to fill big shoes, but you'll try and stitch your own, and hopefully with hard work and good luck, and that's the journey I'm on. So that's point number one, right? The other big learning I've had, Rahul, in life is, it's very difficult to live up to other people's expectations and try and live their dreams for you or their dreams about you. And you can do the best that you are capable of doing. And in life, I think it's very important to stay very focused on giving your best. And if you've given your best, then you can hope for whatever outcomes come from giving your best, but you can't do much more than that. And that's what you can focus on, that's what you can control. So I don't worry too much about outcomes and things I can't control. I focus on things I can control. And so I don't feel overwhelmed, I feel excited and energized.
Is there a burden you carry of every action you take and every move you make being weighed against how your father would have handled the same situation? And is that something that weighs you down, makes you think twice over?
It doesn't. And I'm quite a sensitive person, but I don't worry too much about what other people think. Life is exhausting trying to live other people's plans, as I said. So I don't worry too much about what other people think. So
how is the new Wipro you craft and create going to be different from the Wipro you inherited?
No, look, the journey is long and the opportunities are tremendous. And the reality is, Rahul, that the technology industry is very disruptively changing. If you think about IT services in India over the last 15, 20 years, where all of us were really at the right place at the right time and got very, very lucky, right? People came to India for cost, they stayed for quality, and everybody made money because of scale. And that was the model for the last 20 years. What has fundamentally changed is how pervasive technology has become in the hands of people like you and me. So the amount of compute we have in our hand, the amount of data that it produces is very disruptively changing what we as consumers are asking of our enterprises, who are our customers. So for example, if I'm a bank, I've got to think about an account opening process without somebody walking into a branch or dealing with a teller. It's a profound change for a bank. If I'm a hospital, how do I create the true hospitality experience from the time a patient checks in to the time she checks out? If I'm a retailer, how do I create the true omni-channel experience where I can look at something online, pick it up in store, vice versa, etc., etc. Those are profound changes for companies. And most companies haven't thought about being very experience-led, customer at the center of it all like this. And so that creates tremendous opportunities for companies like us. And so how do you drive this very customer-centric, highly design-centric way of reimagining, re-architecting, re-engineering the process for customers, and then helping them build and run that. And historically, companies like us have had strength in the build and run, technology coming into play. But more and more, we're moving upstream to play in this think, in this design space, which is becoming the right to then play downstream. So I am very, very hopeful. This is, what a lot of people, I define this as digital transformation and digital disruption, but there's tremendous opportunity. So I feel very blessed, and I'm not an optimistic person. I'm usually more of a realist, but I'm very hopeful for where things can go for the technology industry in India in general.
I was reading a report by 2 Oxford professors which says that by 2030, 69% of all formal jobs in the middle skill level will vanish. That's a pretty alarming figure. Is that something you think is of huge concern, because it is for those whose jobs could vanish? How do you think that will be addressed?
I don't react so much. I find statistics quite easy to quote, and some of them are sensationalistic, some of them are alarming. The favorite statistic I use is when I joined Wipro 12 years ago, people said that the cloud industry, everything moving to the cloud would be $150 billion big, and 12 years later I'm still waiting for that to happen, right? So things move at different paces, and I don't sort of get too carried away by what I read. But let me say this. Look, any change and disruption in technology creates anxiety. If you think about when the PC revolution happened, people thought the jobs would go away. When you thought about the ERP revolution happening, people thought jobs would go away. And now with artificial intelligence, it's certainly more profound, it's more disruptive. But I think there'll be jobs in 3 different buckets. There will be jobs that will no longer be relevant because they're highly repetitive, they're highly structured, they can be easily sort of automated. Jobs like bookkeeping and data entry and those kinds of things. There'll certainly be jobs that are of high human and social intelligence and relevance that I think will continue. Jobs like teachers, jobs like caregivers, sales and marketing professionals. I don't suspect those jobs are going away. But then there's this whole bunch of jobs in the middle which I'm very excited about, which is really human-machine interface. So how can human beings come together with intelligence to drive augmentation around that? So assisted AI, if you want to call it that. How can I help a radiologist be a better radiologist and read scans better? How can you help a driver be a better driver? How can you help a lawyer be a better lawyer? By essentially, for example, reading contracts and identifying non-compliance to a contract. How can I help a doctor read a scan better and be a better doctor? It also has huge implications socially, because I can leverage the time of the doctor, which is a scarce commodity in the country like India, more impactfully. If she is spending 25 minutes reading a particular patient, she can spend 10 minutes or 15 minutes, and her time can be better leveraged. So I'm hugely hopeful for this huge bucket in the middle that can be leveraging technology to do their jobs better. And I think that will create tremendous amount of opportunity, tremendous amount of jobs, and tremendous amount of social impact.
Stephen Hawking made headlines in 2014 when he said that the development of artificial intelligence would spell the end of the human race. And Elon Musk said that AI is humanity's biggest existential challenge. How do you at Wipro see it?
So it's still very early days. These are big statements, and I'm not seeing that play out yet. But I think it's important to sort of take that into context, right? I think it's also important to take into context that many things that artificial intelligence can automate can be components or pieces of jobs as opposed to entire jobs, right? So if 5% of a particular job or 10% of a particular job gets changed, it doesn't mean the entire job is getting changed. However, I think it's important to recognize that this is a profound change in technology. And so with it comes an importance to think through the right governance. What are the right social norms that need to be in place to allow the technology to flourish and exist impactfully and thoughtfully without creating huge social disruption? I think it's important. Technology is not going to grow organically. It's going to grow through human beings. And so it's important that, governance and regulation play an important role.
So how well do you place India is to use all the levers of the 4th Industrial Revolution to drive its growth into the future? Are we doing enough? Are we moving fast enough? Or is this another revolution that could leave us behind?
No, I think very much so that we're very core and center to it. I think the government is very thoughtfully thinking through what the right AI construct for the country should be, what the right sort of frame of reference should be. And I think those are important things for us to be thinking through as this technology unfolds. So we shouldn't get we shouldn't get too worried about it. We should certainly think about things and implications that it has. So for example, something that I read, which is, it could, with autonomous cars, it could take away driving jobs. Now, I suspect that that's going to be unlikely in India for a long time. But, however, if that was the case, that's a thoughtful thing to take into consideration. Several million people in the country are employed driving cars or taxis, etc. So I think it's important to have a framework which takes into consideration how impactffully can you be leveraging
as there's more and more automation, it takes that much more growth to create more employment. Recent data suggests that it takes about 10% growth in GDP to create 1% new employment. How do you see the job crisis in the country, or the opportunity, the demographic dividend we speak about? Do you think we're optimally placed to leverage it, or could it be headed towards a disaster?
No, I think you certainly have to think through things like reskilling. I think that's an important component, and I can just give you the example that we live through in the IT industry, because the IT industry is going through a fair amount of transformation in terms of the way it delivers its own work, right? And I'll share with you something very, I think, fairly scaled that we as an industry are driving through NASSCOM, which is the technology body that represents the IT industry. Something called the Future Skills platform, which the Prime Minister actually launched last year in 2018 in February. There are three components to that, which I'm very excited about. One is in the first phase, how do you reskill 2 million of the 4 million people that are directly employed by the industry? And there's a huge focus on leveraging this platform. It's highly curated to an individual's ability to grow, to get assessed. So it's highly self-paced. Gives you huge opportunities to reskill. And the big mindset shift that has happened, Rahul, is people, at least who are employed in the technology industry, are recognizing that if they don't reskill themselves, they're going to get left behind. So this openness to recognize that people have to change with the time. So that's one big effort. The second is, how do you work with universities? And how do you work with universities to enhance the capacity of teachers, leveraging sort of human intervention as well as online intervention, so that they can be better teachers and produce better students in new age technologies, right? We're working today with 3 universities. I think over the next 2 to 3 years, we'll work with 100 universities. These are working with 4,000-5,000 teachers, who are then working with 1:30, 1:40 students. It scales quite quickly, and I think there can be a huge ripple effect of how reskilling and the mindset of reskilling sort of becomes all pervasive. And the third thing which the government is playing a very active role in is, how do you open up this platform to citizens? So how can citizens reskill? So I think this mindset that nothing is going to change perhaps may leave you behind.
But it already happened in the IT sector. So many people in the middle of their careers suddenly found themselves left behind by technology because they'd reached a certain position in terms of salaries, in terms of designations, and there were younger engineers with more relevant contemporary skills.
But the numbers don't reflect that, Rahul. So if I look at the IT industry, we added 150,000 jobs last year. We are still a net employer. You had 150,000 direct jobs, you probably add another 500,000 indirect jobs. So the IT industry is still adding jobs. The nature of those jobs perhaps has changed. The skill required to deliver those jobs is not as relevant, that was relevant 5 years ago, may not be relevant today. It's much more focused around the new age technologies, but the IT industry, despite all the buzz that you're sharing, is a net job creator in the country today. So that tells me something.
There's an ASCOM FICCI report that came out which said that 9% of India's 600 million workforce in the next 5 years, that's about 54 million people, will be deployed in jobs that don't exist at this moment. I'm very curious to know your thoughts as the father of a young child about bringing up a child for a job in the future which doesn't exist at this moment.
Yeah. No, I think the biggest skill, and I worry about this at all levels, is learnability and continuous learning. I think that's the most important non-technical skill if you can develop and own. That's the skill to have. So, if I try and teach my children anything, it's the ability to constantly be open. It's the people who get fixated and aren't able to change that perhaps will get left behind. So if you ask me for the one skill that I focus on, that's the one thing I look on. In fact, when I look at people that I'm interviewing at a senior level, there are 2 things that I look for. I look for learnability and I look for teamwork. Those are the 2 most important things to me, at least. Anybody who doesn't have learnability just gets fixated on ideas and then gets left behind. So
are you also concerned about the kind of graduates who are coming out of most Indian colleges and how they're suboptimally placed to be able to leverage the workforce of the future?
No, I think programs like the one I just described are helping
What the Azim Premji University does is very important, but it's a small part in the larger universe and the challenge that we face as a nation.
But I'll come to that in a second because that's completely unrelated to what we're talking about, and it focuses at a much, much more grassroots level. But I think, look, certainly working with universities to enhance the capacity and the capability of students graduating is an important thing. And I'm talking from my vantage point, which is the technology industry. Certainly companies spend a fair amount of time training new graduates who've joined us. We all spend about 60 to 90 days upskilling people. So certainly upskilling the quality of talent, but also working downstream to enhance the capacity of talent coming out of universities is equally important. The Azim Premji University is focused on something completely different, which is working at a much, much more grassroots level, working to enhance the capacity of people in the education space predominantly. So our two major programs are a master's in education and a master's in development. We've just started a program which is an undergraduate program, which a Bachelor of Arts, and we set up a Bachelor of Education, so people who can actually graduate to become teachers from the program. Our focus is very much in tier 2, tier 3 cities and towns, encouraging people who join the university to go back into smaller towns. So it's a more philanthropic mindset than a commercial capitalistic mindset in terms of at least university that's graduate engineers who are looking to get big high-paying jobs.
Amongst the IT majors in India, there's been a traditional pecking order. Wipro got knocked off that order. You slipped one position. As a young inheritor of such a massive enterprise, how competitive are you? Is it like the ICC cricket ratings 1, 2, 3? Does that matter a lot to you? Are you pushing hard to go from 4 to 3 and then climb up further?
No, look, as I said, you've got to give your best. It hurts to lose. It always hurts to lose. I think it's a natural human emotion. Nobody likes to lose. But look, I'm very hopeful. And as I said, I'm quite optimistic. I think we're doing a lot of the right things. We're investing in some of the right areas. And the race is long. And, I'm hoping that things do turn around and do change and we sort of move up the pecking order. But I don't obsess too much about it. You've got to focus and run your race. It's difficult sometimes running your race, looking to the left and right. It slows you down. So you've got to look in front and focus and do the best you can and hopefully end up in front. But at the same time, being aware of where people are around you at the same time. But you can't control that.
So what are the kind of things about your father's style of working that you like, you'd love to imbibe and take further into the future? And what is it like that you'd like to change?
My father's a great listener, right? I think he speaks very little. And so he listens a lot and he listens to people of all levels. So that's very powerful. You can learn from people at all levels and most importantly from people who are closest to the subject. And so people who are often several levels down from you. And I've learned that. I spend a lot of time with people in the trenches so I get a good sense and pulse of what's going on. His style is very non-judgmental. He doesn't hold things against people. He can get very, very frustrated with somebody and completely have forgotten it 15, 20 minutes ago. So he's not a judgmental person, doesn't hold grudges. And he is not afraid to say, I don't know. I mean, he can ask the most basic question in a really high-powered meeting and say, I have no idea what this is. And I think that's very powerful as well, a humility to sort of be open to learning.
You're very diplomatic. You very conveniently sidestepped the second part of the question, which is about what you don't like, not like to change.
It's... and he will say this as well, I think I'm more empathetic than he is. I'm warmer with people than he is. I think that's a strength. Especially in a services business, you can engage with people more easily. And he will say that that's something that you have that I don't. And again, it's one of those things.
He'll say it or you're hoping he'll say it?
No, I think he'll say it. I think he believes that. But that's one thing I would say that is probably, that is different between us.
Okay. You've also been working in the startup space through Wipro Ventures. You've invested in multiple startups. I'm curious to know your thoughts on the programs that the government has started, Stand Up, Startup India, Digital India. There's a lot of noise around them, but in terms of actual outcomes, they haven't delivered just yet. In fact, there was a report which said about 90% of the new startups were failing on account of lack of innovation. Why do you think that's happening?
Look, so one, I want to just say that a lot of our focus in Wipro Ventures is really global startups. We focus a little bit on India startups, but not so much on, but more so our focus is on global startups. But I really believe this, by the way, what I'm about to say, which is I really think the startup community can do for India what the technology and IT services industry did for India over the last 20 years in terms of brand building, in terms of wealth creation, and in terms of job creation. So I'm very, very optimistic and very, very hopeful in terms of what's coming out of the startup community in India. I think you're seeing more and more global companies, you're seeing more and more product companies emerge. I think you're seeing a mindset which is very profoundly changed over the last 5 or 7 years, which is a mindset of extreme risk-taking and the ability to accept failure and to move on from failure. Culturally, 5 or 7, even 10 years ago, if somebody had a conversation about a failed startup or a failed job, that was highly, highly unencouraged in social circles, in family circles. That's dramatically changed. People are quite proud to say, hey, I tried something, it didn't work, and it's going to change. So I'm very, very hopeful in terms of what and where the startup community can go in India. And you just see it thriving and building, and you see more and more large unicorns appearing, more and more product companies appearing, and they're more and more turning global.